Hello and welcome to Nintendo Therapy, a show about the latest Nintendo news and rumors, as well as a celebration of all of the things Nintendo. My name is Kevin, and one thing that I have noticed about my enjoyment of video games is that things are always kind of better on the second playthrough. For some reason, it's just easier to enjoy something once I already know exactly what I can expect from it. On the first playthrough, you're still trying to figure out what the game even is. By the second time through, you know exactly what you're looking at. And you know what the game is doing. You know what makes it tick. You know why you enjoy it so much, so you're focusing on those aspects. And you know what it's lacking that could help you enjoy it a little more. The first time through, you kind of have blinders on. You have recency bias. So here on Nintendo Therapy, every now and again, we'll be dropping these bonus episodes like this one to discuss our second playthrough experience for these great Nintendo titles. Most of them will probably show up about a year or more after the game is released, when the game has had some time to marinate in our minds and we can put some perspective on things. With time, the hype is faded, and we're left with what's most likely going to be our lasting impression of the game. So, first up on our second playthrough segment, I would like to give my thoughts on The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. People who listen to the podcast know I've been talking about this for a long time. I have a lot of thoughts, and I wanted to put them in their own episode. So, this is kind of a twofold review, though, because it's loaded with my thoughts on Breath of the Wild, because how could it not be? I'll probably never end up writing one of these for that particular game, because all of my thoughts I have worth mentioning are pretty much in this review. And that's something we're gonna get into, is these games are so interwoven, Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild. It's hard to talk about one without talking about the other at this point. So here we go. Chapter 1 of the second playthrough review of Tears of the Kingdom. Here's the intro. So Tears of the Kingdom, probably the most hyped I've been for a game in a long time. Probably since Breath of the Wild. So right from the start of our podcast, we were there, following every single announcement, every trailer, anticipating the game's release with each week that went by. Zelda's always been my go-to game series more than any other franchise. I've finished each game multiple times, I've collected every heart piece, I've tried to understand that Zelda timeline, which is a jumbled ball of nonsense and will probably get its own dedicated podcast at some point. I was raised on the dirt streets of Hyrule, okay? I spent my summers in Termina. I took vacations on Koholint Island. At least I dreamt I did. So Breath of the Wild, it came and I had mixed feelings because of how much it shook up the Zelda formula. Over the years, the playtime I've put into it speaks for itself. I basically never stopped playing Breath of the Wild. Between its initial release and Tears of the Kingdom, I was just always finding new ways to play, always starting a new file every couple of months. It's definitely earned its keep, despite how much it has shaken up what I love about Zelda. So now, here we are, over a year after the release of Tears of the Kingdom while I record this, and I've just finished my second playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom. And even after 2 runs of the game, I'm still not sure which of the two I prefer. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom both have their strengths and weaknesses. It's not as cut and dry as some people on the internet try to make it seem. I've seen the hot takes of Tears of the Kingdom saying, oh, it does everything Breath of the Wild does and more. I've seen people say Breath of the Wild is irrelevant now that Tears of the Kingdom exists. But they really are different experiences that are almost two sides of the same coin. Rupee? Same rupee? I don't know. The apple didn't fall far from the Deku tree on this one, is what I'm saying. In the second playthrough, I'm going to talk about everything, every thought I have about this game, what works, what doesn't, and what my overall final impressions are after over a year of playing this game. If you're somebody who's quick to turn off a review for a game you love just because you feel like the reviewer is going to spend their entire time hating on it, don't worry. I like this game. In fact, it's fair to say I love this game with how many hours I've sunk into it by now. So anytime I have a criticism, just bear in mind it comes from a place of love and it in no way ruined my playing experience. But don't worry. I like to end things on a positive note anyway. I'll probably be dumping compliments on by the end. It's going to be a mixed bag. I'm going to give all my thoughts, and that's why I knew I had to make this its own episode of the podcast, because I have a lot of thoughts. So I think it's time to start off with overall comparisons between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Just straight up, let's compare them. Overall, I always had a feeling that Breath of the Wild, for all of its strengths, was a little bit too simplistic, a little too much like Skyrim, but with less to do, like way less to do. I don't feel that way about Tears of the Kingdom. This game is chock full of content. The Ultra Hand ability alone allows you to craft almost anything you can imagine with almost all of the game's materials. With the underworld and the Sky Islands, the world map, which was already the biggest world map in the series. People don't really talk about that much, how huge the map of Breath of the Wild is. You're adding 2 more layers onto it. You're adding, I mean, yeah, there's not much to the Sky Islands, but still, you're adding a whole second layer with the depths and Sky Islands. You're making the biggest map even bigger. With so much map, you would think that there would be wasted space, because that was a common complaint in Breath of the Wild. But honestly, there's not. Breath of the Wild was criticized for having all these vacant fields on its map, and it just feels like the developers took that personally, because it's not the case here. There's so much to do. You're always within visual distance of an activity. The caves are the best addition to the ground level. I'm gonna just hold this all off for a little later in the review. If you're into the caves like I am, if that's one of your favorite things about the game, don't worry, I got you. We're gonna get to that part a little bit. I love the Sky Islands. I just wish there were more to the Sky Islands, like more like that first giant one that you learn to play on. After like leaving Great Sky Island, everything else is just kind of like a single platform or two, and a lot of it's like repeated ideas that make the sky exploration kind of repetitive. So like there's so many islands with that little launcher that shoots Link away, and you sail over to a close by island and maybe fight a boss, or the ones with those platforms where you attach the jets to. It's just over and over again a lot of the same ideas. I've lost track of how many Sky Islands have that launch pad, you know? It's just so many. It's kind of strange that they didn't seem to have many ideas for the sky layer of the map when they tailored most of their marketing around these islands. It's like the full realization of the ideas promised in Skyward Sword, when that game also was heavily marketed in, hey, look, we're up in the sky. And this does it, obviously it does more with the concept, but in my opinion didn't go far enough still. At the same time, I guess there wasn't much more to do with the concept. I mean, I hate to criticize and not offer a solution, but yeah, I just could have used bigger islands that maybe had caves and stuff on them, like the Great Sky Island. That would have been great. And while we're talking about just overall impressions, there's one thing I need to bring up. An issue that I had early in my first playthrough is that they don't tell you where to go and get the parasail when you leave that Sky Island at the beginning. They tell you, you know, they give you a vague direction on, okay, you need to go over here and talk to these people, but they don't tell you that you're going to get a parasail. And that's a problem. I jumped off the Sky Island eager to explore the world, and what happened was I immediately saw a tower. And having played Breath of the Wild, which they had to know most people going in were going to be relying on their experience from Breath of the Wild, I knew that this was most likely going to be where I got my map data. The tower was guarded by an army of bokoblins, but I'm a noob at this point, so for all I know, every tower is guarded by enemies like this. I don't know what towers in Tears of the Kingdom are going to be like. So sometimes you just got to kill some pig monsters for some map data. It's just like that sometimes. There's no Google Maps in Hyrule, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to get my map data. So I spent a solid hour fighting my way into this tower, dying several times because I only had 3 or 4. I can't remember how many hearts you have at that point. But I'm determined. I'm doing this. The map data, it's going to be mine. I finally killed all the enemies inside, and then I was instantly hit with a blood moon. So now all those enemies that I just spent like an hour killing, they're back, and now I gotta fight my way in again. I spent another hour doing that. I'm determined. I want this map data. These pigs are big, but I got the Triforce of Courage. I'm gonna get through. So at long last, I make it to the control panel, only to find out that the tower can't be activated. You need the paraglider first, which that's the heart of my criticism for this part of the game here. They really should have hammered home, hey, even if you don't mention the towers, just like, hey, you should really go get this paraglider before you do anything, because you're going to need it. The game should have given you the glider when you left the first island, to tell you the truth, or at least make it more clear that you need to go to the fortress before you do anything. I mean, yeah, they mark the destination on your map, I get it, but this is an open world, do whatever you want at any time game. Nobody pays attention to the dots on the map. They're like, I want to do what I want to do. This was made especially clear on my second playthrough, because I was specifically looking to see if I was just not paying attention the first time through, and it turns out the game really does give you very little to indicate how important it is to go to that fortress. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of a crazy oversight to me, because they know most people playing this have played the last game and are going to expect to be able to activate this tower. And I want my map data. Like, that's what I want. It's the first thing I do in these games. I complete the map so I know where I am, and then I start exploring from there. My only other general complaint before we dive into a deep analysis is that, and this is where I'm going to lose some people here, the cutscenes to me are cringe. Like, the faces that they give Ganon are just laughable when they're supposed to be intimidating. The line readings they give some of these characters, Zelda especially, are these crazy, overly dramatic when it doesn't seem to fit the situation. I don't know how to put my finger on it, but it's just like so exhausting the way that her line readings are coming out. It's over the top, every line, and I honestly don't know how people don't talk more about this, because if any other franchise fumbled the cutscenes this way, they'd be all memed to death, but Zelda gets a pass for some reason. I don't want to devote too much time to this complaint, because it might just be a personal point of view kind of thing, because like I said, I haven't seen anyone else mention this or bring it up, but I don't know. I still see people online saying that these cutscenes like move them to tears of the kingdom, and I just don't see it. Like, to me, it had writing on par with like a bad Saturday morning cartoon. If this is the writing that the Zelda community is willing to accept as a good storyline, I'm kind of nervous for the Zelda movie. Have some standards, people. Like this, I don't know. Yes, it's true this game has more story than most Zelda games have, but I was not that moved by it was still a very bare bones storytelling story. So now that overall thoughts are out of the way, let's just get down to the details. New abilities. Some of them are improvements, some of them are a lateral move, and some of them are not that great in my opinion. So let's break them down one by one. The abilities. Let's start with Ascend. This is actually my favorite of the new abilities in the game. The puzzles revolving around it aren't exactly rocket science, but it always feels satisfying when your brain clicks and thinks of an environment in a three-dimensional way, and you're able to realize you're supposed to enter something from below or the floor below. I'm sure they knew they were going to need this as soon as they decided to have caves in the game, because people are going to need an easy way to get out of that cave if they get lost. So not only is it a fun puzzle solving mechanic, but it also is a lifeline that lets you feel free to explore. I mean, sure, they could warp out of the caves and warp to a shrine or something, but maybe you don't have a warp point nearby and you want to stay in that area. The more I think about Ascend, the more I realize just how much it benefits the player. I've seen a few reviewers say this is an inferior version of Revali's Gale, but I honestly think that's comparing two different things. Revali's Gale wasn't a rune, it was gained by finishing a Divine Beast. It was a champion ability. And while I do agree that the ability is something that is sorely missed in this game, Ascend isn't to blame. And yes, it is missing from the Revali's Gale is missing from this game. I've seen some people point out how you can throw a pine cone into a fire and get the same effect, but think about that. There's so many steps to dropping the wood and the flint and getting a metal weapon out, or getting a fire item out, lighting the fire, getting a pine cone out, throwing the pine cone on, jumping in. Revali's Gale, you literally just held a button down and released it. So don't say just because this thing kind of functions the same, it's a fair replacement. So Ascend, it's just a fun idea, and it's fun to use almost every single time. I think my favorite example is there's a shrine where there's a wall made out of lasers coming at you, and it's a booby trap style thing, like a Star Trek version of a wall of spikes because it's lasers. And you need to ascend above it before getting chopped to bits. And it's the kind of thing you start wishing was in other games you play when you put Tears of the Kingdom down for a while, because that's how great Ascend is. More games need Ascend. So I've said enough about Ascend. Let's move on to Recall. Recall, definitely influenced by Breath of the Wild's time stop ability. For me, this one is an upgrade. So we've got two upgrades now. Looking back, well, Ascend didn't really compare to anything, but looking back with almost a decade of perspective, it feels like in Breath of the Wild, the time stop ability could have been combined with the freeze ability. You're essentially freezing things in time. It would make that ability more versatile, and then you have an available slot for a new ability you could add, maybe Ascend. Or you could have the freeze ability and this rewind feature, because it's awesome. Plus the puzzles around reversing time, they're so much more interesting than stopping an object and building that kinetic energy like in Breath of the Wild. It was always a gamble if you hit the thing a little too much or too little. This, it's more fun, it's more intuitive. The thing goes backwards in time. It's just very good upgrade here. Now, Fuse. Fuse is where we get into the parts of the game that I consider a downgrade. Fuse, to me, it's just not fun. I don't like that I can't find strong weapons in the world as often as I can in Breath of the Wild. I don't like that I constantly need to be searching for materials to fuse to my weapons in order to make them useful in difficult battles. Even if they're already in my inventory, I find myself every now and then just not bothering and fighting high-level enemies with a sword that's only like a level 6 in strength, because I don't want it to break. We got the weapon durability here, and weapon durability didn't bother me in Breath of the Wild because I could always just find another strong sword. But here, I have to make another strong sword, and it's just that extra step that makes it a little bit annoying. So, didn't mind weapon durability in Breath of the Wild. I do mind it here. I don't like that I need to spend a good chunk of my exploring time finding rocks to fuse so I can break other rocks. I never found a weapon durability a problem in Breath of the Wild. I'm saying, like, I thought it was a great way to force you to use all the different types of weapons, but here it bothers me because I've taken time to craft something that's just going to go away in a few minutes. Once you have more ownership of how that item was created, it feels a lot worse when it goes away. In Breath of the Wild, when my weapon with 55 level strength broke, I just needed to find a new one. I probably already had one. Here, I need to find 2 items that will combine to make that strength level. So it's just fusing items with shields also. It's kind of pointless. Every now and then you get something cool like a skateboard, but for the most part, it's not worth the time. This is where we can start talking about how this game has so much going on that there are whole mechanics involved that I almost never used. First item on the list of stuff I didn't care to do in this game is fuse items to shields. I never needed it. Like every now and then I'd fuse a rocket to get up high because again I don't have Revali's Gale, but fusing items to your shield, I literally fused like 3 different items to my shield the whole playthrough. Fusing items to your arrows is the best use of this ability, but it doesn't even feel like it's using the same ability. It feels like they changed the mechanics of how the bow and arrow work. It doesn't feel like it's in fact, I'm not even sure without looking it up if the different arrow types in this game are a result of fuse or if it's just a new separate mechanic altogether. You don't need to enter that fuse detective mode to do the arrows, so regardless of whether or not the abilities are linked in the game's lore, they could have just kept the arrow mechanic without adding the fuse mechanic. At the very least, the fuse mechanic needed a little bit more work because of the weapon durability and everything I discussed. Ultra Hand, the 4th final ability you get in this game. Well, there is a secret one, but not really. It's sort of my chief complaint with the entire experience. Again, I love this game, so chief complaint makes it sound like I didn't, but I'm not saying any of this ruins the game for me. These are all just like personal preferences in how I play, but I never liked Ultra Hand. Magnesis in Breath of the Wild did as much as I wanted this ability to do. I didn't feel like the game is constantly in Breath of the Wild stopping my forward progression to glue things together, and here that's exactly what I feel like. I feel like there's many times where I'm heading in one direction and then I see one of those Koroks with the cute backpack who needs to be reunited with their friend, so I need to stitch together a quick mode of transportation, or I'm doing a shrine and I completely understand how to solve the puzzle. I just need to sink the time in to fuse together the materials the proper way. Like, I know what you wanted me to do here, and I don't feel like taking the time to do it. I don't feel like fusing this stuff together. That's not something you should be thinking while playing a Zelda game. You shouldn't be like, I get it. You want me to fuse the log to the plate and then fuse the plate to the spinning thing and then shoot the button. It's not a hard puzzle. It's just one that's taking my time right now. So that's a problem with Fuse to me. Think about all the fusing you do. Exploring the Sky Islands, you stop your forward progression to fuse a rocket onto a platform. Exploring the world map, you need to stop to fuse a raft together. Walking down to a shrine you see in the distance, you need to stop to fuse wooden planks into a signpost. I don't think anything in Breath of the Wild stopped my exploration anywhere near as often as Ultra Hand does. And I've seen people build these fantastic things with this, but it's just not the way I play. Even the vehicles that some of the gamers have used as their main mode of transportation, I feel like they're in a direct opposition with the fantasy I'm trying to live out. If you want to use a faster mode of transportation around Hyrule, ride a horse. I shouldn't have to build a magic flying machine. I know in Breath of the Wild you get that motorcycle, but that was pretty much after you'd finished everything in the game already. Add crafting vehicles and playing with Ultra Hand to that list of mechanics I was never interested in. And since I know people will point out if I don't mention it, auto build goes with this as well. That was that other the other ability you get. There's not much to say about auto build. It's just I never really used it because I wasn't really building a lot. Okay, now let's talk about the other one-to-one Tears has in common with Breath of the Wild, Sage abilities versus the vows. So, there's the Zora abilities, or Vow of Sidon versus Mipha's Grace. In Breath of the Wild, Mipha's Grace would revive you after your hearts were drained. In Zelda terms, it was essentially meant that you had a fairy bottle at all times. Tears of the Kingdom's Zora ability is a water shield that splashes out as an attack. Outside the dungeon where you earn this ability, I barely ever used it. You can add that to the list as well. As we add to the list of mechanics I'd never used, it's starting to really be clear how much they could have focused some of this other stuff in the game. We're starting to see the game's kind of full of extra stuff that just, it's kind of there, you know? It's just not a strong attack, and it's kind of a missed opportunity that there weren't more places in the world that needed a good blast of water to solve the puzzle, more spinny fans to move with it. Well, I guess you could use the gust of wind for those, but as far as the two Zora abilities, this point goes to Breath of the Wild on this one. Definitely prefer Mipha's Grace. Daruk's Protection versus Vow of Yunobo. Daruk's Protection, it's kind of a double-edged sword. It grants immunity from an enemy hit, which is great. However, I feel like after going without it for all of Tears of the Kingdom, I can kind of see it as unnecessary now. I would have never thought that while I was playing Breath of the Wild, but I never missed Daruk's Protection while I was playing this. Vow of Yunobo, however, it's one of the best abilities in both games because it lets you blast these rock walls and not have to keep wasting your swords and keep fusing rocks to swords over and over again. Blasting the rock walls, it's essential to almost every cave in Tears of the Kingdom. I mean, like I said, you could fuse a rock to your weapon and chip away, but it's so much more effective to just destroy them. Plus, it's kind of fun to just unleash that power into a single blast that rains rare stones down for the plucking. So this point goes to Tears of the Kingdom. Revali's Gale versus Vow of Tulin. The Vow of Tulin, it's one of the biggest disappointments in Tears of the Kingdom for me. Quite simply put, this is a major downgrade here. It's just like the pathetic thrust that the Zora armor gives you in the water, but now it's in the sky. It's not so useless that it goes on the list of things I never used. I'll admit I used it a lot, but Revali's Gale, we've already mentioned, come on. It's like the best thing in Breath of the Wild. It's by far my biggest want whenever playing Tears of the Kingdom. So to replace it with this, it's just unacceptable. It's just simply unacceptable. Vow of Raiju. It's the ability that's most similar to its Breath of the Wild counterpart. It's also the ability that greatest exemplifies a fundamental flaw in how Tears of the Kingdom implements its Sage abilities. The fact that you need to press A next to a stage, next to a Sage, like a tag team partner, it really weakens the system compared to what there was in Breath of the Wild. For starters, when I'm foraging and I'm often just mashing the A button to pick up a large quantity of items that have dropped, it's very easy to accidentally trigger one of your helpers while doing this. I can't even count how many times I've accidentally launched Yunobo like a rocket into the distance just trying to pick up some enemy drops. And during the chaos of battle, it's also often difficult to even find the partner whose ability you want to use. So sometimes they're even running away from you, like to get towards another enemy. And it's like, come on, come here. I need you. This is what you exist for. Get over here. So I'm torn on this because I actually adore the fact that you can run around with this ghost party. It's not something the Zelda series has really ever had before. It almost made me feel like I was playing an MMORPG. I just wish they implemented the use of their abilities better and let you map them to a button or something, because, I mean, put them on the wheel the way the abilities are. I don't know how this didn't come up in playtesting, because having to interact with each sage to use their ability, it's super cumbersome, and it was just so simple in the last game, making each one a different button or an ability that used automatically. And Now to have to run over to someone to activate their skill, it's just, in the heat of battle, it's no good. Speaking of changes from the last game, on to the next chapter of the review, titled Major Changes. So, okay, caves. If you listen to this podcast from the very beginning, I think there's early episodes where I talked about wanting caves in Breath of the Wild before we even knew it was going to be a thing here. So my favorite parts of Twilight Princess are when you're exploring those mazy caves they have scattered throughout Hyrule, and you've got nothing but your lantern to light the way, and there's just something so cool about the sense of exploration you get. There's spider webs everywhere, and when I first saw that in Tears of the Kingdom, when I first saw we were going to have these caves, I was pumped. The caves are peak immersion in this world for me. Some are small, some are long twisted mazes, some go into caverns with forgotten structures and buried buildings with like implied history. Now that is the Zelda experience I want. Imagining the past history of a crumbling ruin is what made most of the series' best dungeons so great. Like, what is this place? What was this place? How did it end up this way? Then some of the caves go up into mountains and have like a treehouse adventure vibe. So they really explored this idea really well. I do still think they could have gone a little deeper with it though. Like literally deeper. Like I'm not sure that the caves and the depths needed to be separate concepts. Think about how much cooler it would have been if every time you discover a cave, if you weren't sure how low it was going to go. Some of them could have led to giant underground areas. Some of them, for the most part, the biggest thing you're going to find in this game would be like a big combat room. But I wanted to combine this because of the fact that I'm not sure we needed the depths to be the full size of the Hyrule map. They're extremely repetitive. They almost feel like an afterthought, which is funny because like almost none of the marketing, it's almost like they were keeping these as a secret. Nothing much changes throughout the depths, and there are sections that are almost identical to each other. The area by the volcano has lava flow. That's about it. The entire rest, and then there's the cemetery by the desert area, but the rest of the map, not that much variation. They could have made select caves that led further down into a bottom area. And imagine if some of them connected. Some of them connect, some of them don't. You never know what you're going to get. So I think the depths were supposed to be a modern spin on the Dark World concept that we've seen in a lot of Zelda games, because we have the whole pairing of the shrines up top with the glow, I forget what they're called, but the little glow areas below, and then every stable on the map up top. If you're in a stable in Hyrule, below you have a Lionel to fight in the depths. So they were like grouping things, and I think for the most part, every time there's a mountain that goes up on Hyrule, it's a slope that goes down in the depths. So they were able to make every area of the Dark World, though, in the Super Nintendo A Link to the Past. The Dark World, every area contains something unique and interesting. The depths, they feel like they could have been randomly generated, which is a shame, because the layout actually, like I said, it does have relation to the layer above, so it shouldn't feel that way. One thing that the Underworld is great for is using it as a way to find shrines, though. Breath of the Wild didn't have anything that made it this easy. Finding a light beacon below, that's what they're called, light beacons. You find it, you can search for the shrine above that correlates. It's how I found them all without having to use any guides. I could find every shrine in the game just by finding the light beacons. Overall, though, the caves, they're one of those top tier improvements that really stand out as essential when you go back to Breath of the Wild, the kind of thing you instantly miss when comparing the two games. That's why I've always advocated that Breath of the Wild needed cave exploring, because its world, it just feels kind of flat without it. maybe flat isn't the right word because there are mountains and valleys and lakes, but it feels like the entire world is on like a single layer. So lastly, not to be too nitpicky, but I kind of wish there were more chests with silver rupees in the caves, or even purple rupees hidden all over the land. I feel like money is something the Zelda franchise never found a good balance for. There's a lot of games in the series where money is practically useless. As in like Ocarina of Time and A Link to the Past, especially Ocarina of Time, where almost everything in the game that costs a decent amount of money is given to you for free somewhere else. You just need to know where to get it. So here, on the other hand, we're on the other end of the spectrum. You never seem to have enough money. Maybe it's just the way I play, where I don't like to sell anything because I'm afraid I'll need it for armor upgrade or something, but I also don't feel like selling your collectibles should be the main source of income in a game. And if it is, give me more to sell that's actually worth something, because I just never seem to have enough money in this game. I will say though, the rewards you get from chests in Tears of the Kingdom are one of the many improvements the game brings to the table. There were so many times in Breath of the Wild that I was excited to solve a puzzle in a shrine and get the chest, only to get a useless weapon with like 6 strength, and you just drop it. You don't even need it. You couldn't even take it because your weapon slots were full. Here, it seems like they figured out that this was a mistake because the items in the boxes are almost items you can stack. Stuff like potions or rare minerals like a diamond, or stuff that doesn't get left behind. There's also a good amount of quality of life changes to the game. The best one is the ability to drop weapons without having to open the menu. Everyone has pointed this out. This is one of the hardest things to go back to losing when you play Breath of the Wild. It's particularly helpful when opening a chest that contains a weapon and all your slots are full. In Breath of the Wild, you needed to open the chest again after opening the menu to drop something. It's a fantastic improvement, but at the same time, it's like, shouldn't it have always been this way? So I don't know if it loses points for that, but I'll give it the credit. It's a great improvement. And now, this next section, I'm going to be calling Problems with Both Games. So there's issues that are present in Tears of the Kingdom that are also present in Breath of the Wild. Each one, it's kind of a missed opportunity for Tears of the Kingdom to have made an improvement, but unfortunately they just left it the way it was. For example, both games have this issue with constant ragdolling of both Link and the enemies. I mean, I understand they're trying to demonstrate that a big hit is a big hit. It's a big deal, but sometimes it just takes forever for Link to get up. You're just like, get up, get up. It gets worse later in the game when your armor is leveled and all these hits are only damaging you for like half a heart. But so you're not taking any damage, but you're still getting tossed like 20 yards. And it goes both ways too, because there's times where I'm farming for a specific enemy drop, and so many of these enemies want to fight right near the edge of a cliff, and it's like a 90% chance that you're just going to launch them, just yeet right off the edge of the cliff. A lot of times you need to adjust your fighting so that you don't just destroy them and lose your drop. So, come on. Nobody wants to climb back up after that thing falls down. Fix this. This should have been fixed. Speaking of climbing, the rain. Rain's an issue in both games. Tears of the Kingdom, it tried to fix this with giving you potions and armor that help climbing in the rain. Again, a thing where it's like it should have always been like this, but it's not enough. For starters, climbing isn't the only thing that's annoying in the rain. Sometimes there's a pile of leaves to burn, and there's rain on the entire forecast you have in the corner of your screen, so you have to just come back later. There's no way to find that Korok right now. You just can't. You just gotta come back later when it's not raining. There's also caves with thorns blocking them, and that can't be cleared in the rain either. And the lightning. I can't even tell you how many times I've been carrying nothing but metallic weapons and bows, and now I gotta unequip everything in this lightning storm. It's just so annoying, and it doesn't feel like it really adds anything to the experience. At least in Breath of the Wild, they had a few instances where you would toss a metal object somewhere to get a lightning bolt to strike there. It's just not good. So think of how great it would have been, though, to introduce an instrument into the game that could control the weather. You could even use this to introduce new puzzle types by needing to make it rain or needing to have a lightning bolt hit a certain point, like I just said Breath of the Wild did. Bring rain to the desert. Like, musical instruments affecting the world are such a staple of the series. It's not just from Ocarina of Time. It's in Majora's Mask, it's in Link's Awakening, Link to the Past, Twilight Princess, Spirit Tracks. That's just off the top of my head. There's a lot of Zelda games that use an instrument. At the same time, the instrument, that's the word I couldn't think of, the instrument could be helping you with the weather. It could also change the time of day. Instead of having to make a campfire, you could just use your instrument to make it morning or noon or night. Overall, though, I think most of my thoughts on both games, it fits into the category of open is not always better, and that's the next category of this review. Open is not always better. Both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are open world games, so they both share this criticism. Think of how many times you're in a shrine and you can see a clear solution that the developers were aiming for. But there's also a way to just go around and go straight to the end, and you just skip all of that. It feels cheap. It feels like cheating, but you still do it. Like, they should have stopped me. You feel like the developers should have stopped me from doing this, you know? Make me solve their puzzle the way it's supposed to be solved. Also, the open world nature of the game, it lends to a lot of times where I'm solving puzzles that I didn't even know existed. So this is in both games, but an example is one time I found a cave where I saw one of the cracked rock walls you're meant to like destroy. So obviously I destroy it. This led to water being drained from an area I hadn't even seen yet. And then that revealed a shrine. So now the obvious intended outcome here is for you to see the shrine sticking out of the water, wonder how you get to it, explore around, find the rocks, break them, and drain the water underneath. However, I found the solution to the puzzle before even finding the puzzle. There are a lot of examples of this in the open world. Other times you'll just fiddle with something while you're exploring on the map, and then hours later you find an NPC who gives you a mission to do that exact thing. For example, I completed a Mystery in the Depths side mission, and then hours later I talked to Josha, who gave me the mission. She was like, there's a temple in the depths, and then Link was like, dude, I already did it. It's done. The temple and stuff, it just said, the game just said, like, it gave you the mission, and then it just says mission complete right away. There are many instances where you'll get a mission and it will prompt the message that you got the mission, and then instantly prompt the mission complete text. So there's also this weird disconnect that happens with the story's narrative, because I feel like most players, they're going to collect all of the tiers fairly early in the game, but for some reason they tied specific tiers to each location, kind of like they were doing with the memories in Breath of the Wild. Like, it made sense in Breath of the Wild because those were memories of those places. And it's a shame because I think this could have been a really cool plot to follow. It's like a ghost story where there's something takes the form of something familiar, in this case Zelda, and they're doing it in like a spooky way. It's weird how they link the Tears cutscenes to specific locations, because unlike the memories that are in Breath of the Wild, the majority of the Tears have absolutely nothing to do with the location they're found in. So there was no need to link certain cutscenes to that specific tier. Just have the story play out in order, no matter which order you find the Tears in. It would have made way more sense. And the fact that the open world nature of this game makes the story almost impossible to follow in a straight line makes everything kind of confusing. There are huge chunks of the story that can be discovered in almost any order, And it gets to the point where you just start ignoring the cutscenes and you tell yourself, well, I'll just watch them all in order once I have them. And then at that point, you just end up skipping them when you find them. And that shouldn't be something you're doing. One last critique I'd like to throw out. I really think there should have been a fishing mechanic here. This is just kind of out of the blue, but it's kind of strange that the 2 Zelda games where the fish are actually useful for something doesn't have a fishing mechanic. They could have kept large versions of existing fish at like a lower depth in the water. Like just sink these fish down lower in the water and make it so you can only catch them with a fishing pole. Maybe have those give better stat boosts when you put them in recipes, because give me the fishing pole. You can even have it have weapon durability. Keep track of what fish you've caught in like a little log, like I think Twilight Princess did that. Just Animal Crossing that up. It's so strange to me. Twilight Princess, it lets you fish anywhere for no reason, and these games have a reason to catch fish, but you just shoot them or electrocute them or whatever you're going to do. Fish for them. You should be able to fish for them. And maybe I don't need to be giving this game any more activities because there's so much to do. Like, the game is packed, like I've said before, with goals. There's even... I'm over 200 hours in, and there's stuff I still feel like I'm not even ready to start. There's stuff in here I don't think I'll ever do. I mean, I wrote that in this review here, and I'm going to just say I did go back and do all of these things, but it's a lot. So you got to fill your compendium, find all the wells, find all the signpost guys who need help keeping the sign up, level up all the armor, find the Yiga clan bases and the Yiga schematics. There's camp raids. I could spend years playing this game, and I probably will. So now I'm going to move into the next section. It's called What I Love. I've been kind of getting into a negative pocket here in the review. Let's talk about what I love about this game. Okay. Like I promised at the beginning, once I get all my nitpicks and criticisms out of the way, I'm going to back end this thing with what I love. I love that you can level up your horse's stats in this game just like armor. I mean, how is that not in Breath of the Wild? I barely used my horse in Breath of the Wild, but if I can fully max out its stats, of course I'm going to do it. That's such a great idea. Also, customizing Link's house, it's such a nice touch. I spent way more time doing that than I needed to. Just another thing, why wasn't this in Breath of the Wild? Such a good idea to just build this little custom house of his. The entire sequence for gaining the 5th Sage ability, phenomenal. First, you build this battle armor in an abandoned mine, and the atmosphere is just so incredible. Then you take it on a journey where you meet obstacles that teach you how to use all of his abilities. Then you end up in a robot fighting match, like a cage match. It's everything you wish the TV show BattleBots could have been, and it also kind of reminded me of Terror Boxer on the Virtual Boy. It's got a little bit of Punch Out vibes in there, a little bit of Punch Out. It didn't even matter to me that I apparently did this in the wrong order. Again, open is not always better, because I did it way before going to the castle and unveiling the fake Zelda as Ganon puppet, and then like the gang, they have this really big meeting about how there's supposed to be 5 stages, and oh, we need to find the 5th sage, and then Link is like, yeah, I already got the other one already. And it ties, like I said, it's like non-linear, not really helping things, because they should know I found it already. We just did this giant fight together, and the 5th sage was with you. It's been with us the whole time. It doesn't make any sense that you don't know I already got it. Speaking of which, that end boss fake out, great decision. I completely expected the final battle to take place when I was following the fake Zelda through the Hyrule Castle, because that's how Breath of the Wild ended. And you went up to the Hyrule Castle, and that's where it was. I was pleasantly surprised. That fake out sequence and the Ganon bits that follow, it might be one of the most satisfying Zelda end game bosses events like ever. And the route to the actual final boss, possibly my favorite moment from the game. The reenactment of the opening, perfect. The overall tone of this game doesn't get enough love either. It's very evident in that boss battle that this game has a darker tone than most Zelda games. It reminds me of Majora's Mask, the way the world it's full of people who all seem to have accepted that the end is near. It feels like doom is around every corner, and you're exploring caves and you see the waves of red gloom pouring up from the earth's cracks. Everywhere you go, people are rebuilding their homes and towns. The Blood Moon sequence, it's completely overdramatic. The game goes hard on this vibe, and it's better for it. Skydiving. I love this mechanic. It was always fun in this world. I never got tired of it. It showed the developers were trying to think of like fun ways to use it too, because there's lots of examples of locations where you dive in to like avoid lasers or avoid floating obstacles. It feels like a sequence from like Mission Impossible sometimes. There's plenty of places where you go from Sky Island down past the surface level into the depths below. You just do all 3 layers. They give you a glider outfit to like traverse while free falling. It really takes the ideas developed in Skyward Sword and puts them to shame in how well it's executed here. So in summation, even after writing this giant review, I still have so many complicated feelings about this game. Thank you for listening this far if you have. It's interesting how many times Nintendo has released Zelda games that the fan base pits against each other. You've got Ocarina of Time versus Majora's Mask. You've got Wind Waker versus Twilight Princess. Link's Awakening versus the Oracle games. Now Breath of the Wild versus Tears of the Kingdom. It was inevitable, but I don't feel like that comparison works as well as the others. In most of the other examples I listed, games are way more different than these two. Majora's Mask gave us an entire new world separate from Ocarina of Time. It was just using the same assets. Majora's Mask was like a party with all the same invited guests at a different house. And Tears of the Kingdom at times feels like a party at the same house with the same guests, but they opened up the attic in the basement. And there are also times where it feels like none of that matters because there is enough new content here to hold everything up. But then at the same time, I feel like they could have just put all of those new ideas into a new game with zero connection to Breath of the Wild, like they did in the Wind Waker Twilight Princess situation. A lot of fresh ideas in this game would have been just as satisfying in a unique Zelda world. We didn't need the same map and the same art style. Like fusing items, an underworld that mirrors the overworld, sky islands, caves, nothing that makes this game different from Breath of the Wild required it to be Breath of the Wild. So if it's not clear what I'm trying to communicate here, watch the Zelda tech demo they did for the Wii U. It looks nothing like any of the existing Zelda games we have so far. They could have made that game with all of these ideas in the same amount of time. And that's just a for instance. They also could have come up with something completely unique that we've never seen before. It has been a long time since I've had such complicated feelings about a game that under any other circumstances would have unquestionably been my pick for Game of the Year. But the existence of Breath of the Wild makes Tears of the Kingdom feel like so much less of an accomplishment. And that's a shame because I do tend to lean more towards Tears of the Kingdom as the better game, despite all the criticisms I've had in this review. Don't get me wrong, I realize that Nintendo was in a tough spot. There were literally millions of players, tens of millions, who experienced Breath of the Wild as their first ever Zelda game, so it made sense to give them something familiar. And even if it is the superior version, it's still a version of something rather than its own thing. It feels like an iteration and not something all its own with its own voice and message. It's hard to tell how many of these criticisms I would have had if Breath of the Wild didn't exist, if it was never released, if we skipped straight to this. How much can I fairly criticize Tears of the Kingdom for simply existing in a world that also has Breath of the Wild? I think it all comes down to the first thought I had when Nintendo first revealed that a new Zelda game would be a continuation instead of its own unique adventure. I would have much preferred a Wind Waker Twilight Princess Zelda library on the Switch, the way GameCube had, especially considering the time this game took to develop. 7 years, it's enough time to have made a unique Zelda experience and not one that feels like it's trying to replace the previous one. Tears of the Kingdom ends up feeling like an encore and not the show itself. My feelings on this become the most clear to me when I see people asking if they can just start here or if they should play Breath of the Wild first. And I honestly feel like your experience is improved 100 times by playing Breath of the Wild first. And not just a quick playthrough so that you can start this game like, okay, I'm going to get through Breath of the Wild and then I'm going to play Tears of the Kingdom. I mean like a real full 120-hour file. But at the same time, I'm glad they made this game. I enjoy the journey it sent me on, and the overall story, when properly organized, is probably in the top 3 for the series for me. And even if it does from point to point feel like a different kid playing with the same toys, this kid plays with them better. And this second kid has better ideas, better stories, more streamlined gameplay. Okay, the metaphor falls apart there, but you know what I'm saying. I think I'll just need to learn to live with the bottom line being that Tears of the Kingdom, it's a fantastic game that will always have an asterisk next to its name reading C, Breath of the Wild. So this has been the first bonus episode we've done for second playthrough, and I've rambled for about an hour now. These are most of my thoughts on this game. I'm glad I got them out there. Let us know what you think of Tears of the Kingdom, and let us know if you want us to do more focused episodes like this that are specifically about a single game. My name is Kevin, and keep tuning in to Nintendo Therapy for more Nintendo content. Thank you.